I will do, during my presentation, a little bit more introduction. I know some of you have heard it last time, but it's on the web, so and on the video. That's for the readers outside. So the title is Inkjet Printing Coming to Age. It is, if you look at printing, at least for fine art, it is mostly inkjet printing. It's not the only form, of course, but it is the main form, and that's what I want to talk about. So briefly, the program, brief introduction. I start with the challenges of printing, what to do, talk a little bit about printers, about inks, papers and media, drivers and RIPs, raster imaging processes is RIP, editing, Outlook. I may have no slide for Outlook, but we can discuss that. Maybe that's part of the discussion, and Q&A and at any time. So because this time, printing is a little bit difficult to present in a lecture because you normally need some printers here, but we would be probably 80% of the time would be spent in feeding paper, waiting for print, or something like that. So it's very difficult. So it may be a little bit more dry than to have live presentations. So you're welcome to spice it up with some interesting and challenging questions. I'm the editor and owner of two websites. One is Outback Photo, which is actually the central website, and Outback Print, which is just dedicated to printing, which may tell you that I'm very much into printing. Into means whenever I take a photo, I only care if it prints well. For other purposes, rarely there, except I photograph a printer to show it on my website. That's the only, sometimes I do that, and I hate to do it, and I'm not very good at it. So it's a magazine about digital photography. We talk about SLRs, we talk about workflow, we talk about fine art printing, and that's what we talk today, Photoshop techniques and such. We sell electronic books on different topics. The most appropriate for today is our book on digital fine art printing, which covers everything we talked today, of course, in very much more detail. We can just scratch the surface. So now let's get started. Printing is very easy if, big if, everything works right. And there are three possibilities. You are lucky, you hope it was a good print, or you have experience. And I think if I show you the many parameters which are involved in printing, you may get the idea that you need to understand what you're doing. And even if you understand, you have to be sometimes lucky. Or let's say, in some cases, you are not so lucky and frustrated to get something bad out of your printer. The only people who enjoy that are the paper and ink manufacturers. They love it. They want you to do a lot of prints you don't like for finally getting one you like. So what needs to be right? First of all, the printer needs to be right. That's kind of an obvious, which we will see it's kind of so many options today that that's kind of a given. The ink has to be right. The paper or media have to be right. Drivers and the raster imaging processor settings have to be right. The color management has to be very, very right. And this is actually the main cause for bad prints. In most cases, is color management, bad profiles. And of course, the image editing. If you just think you take a file out of your camera and print in Ansel Adams, think twice. And then, and that's what we don't cover today, is print handling and presentation makes it then into a completely different thing. Probably many of you have experienced that you have a print which looks nice. Once you matte and frame it, it looks just a class better. So a nice print can look good, and a good print can look great. But that's not what we are talking today. So all has to match, and that was where I started. Everything has to match to work. The printer, ink, paper or media, driver or rip settings, color management. What mean match? They have to all work together for that kind of paper, that kind of ink, that kind of driver, that kind of color management. There's not, I have a wonderful profile for a glossy paper, and that's a good idea to use it on a matte paper. Not a good idea. Won't work. You know, you get a print, and the content is all there, but you don't get a great print. What are the main printing challenges? One is kind of the obvious, is color gamut. What kind of colors can you represent? We talk about that a little bit later. The other thing which is very important is the maximum density you get. What is the deepest black you can print? Because from there, in the paper white, you define the dynamic range you can get on a print. If you have a very light black, if it's not a deep black, you cannot have a high contrast. And you cannot print, at least not with today's printers, you cannot print whiter than the paper. Because in none of the printers I know or I use, there is a white ink. Could you?
Just like your laundry detergent makes white or white. So
we get to that. That's optical brighteners, and that's a good. That's a trick.
But it's whiter than white.
Yeah, and it fades. We get to optical. The question was, you can use brighteners, and believe me, it's overused in many cases, not underutilized. And actually, it's not really white. It's actually blue. But you know, whatever you call white, it gives the impression to the eye it's very white. But it's one of the tricks in the book to improve that. So there's nothing really wrong with it, except for certain reasons. So color gamut is just defined what range of colors you can present. And some photographers care a lot about color gamut. We belong to the photographers who don't care that much because we like more muted colors, more subtle colors. But, you know, it started, I think, with what was film colors, which got always more and more and more, and Belvia, and yeah. So, which means we get easily into the area where we need stronger and stronger colors. But then there are some real things in the nature, for example, some reds, which you want to represent, and it may be a challenge to represent that. And if this special red is very important for that image, it may be a problem. So this is one thing which the manufacturers of printers and mainly inks have to face, how to get a wide gamut. And we will see it would be easy if there would, not easy, it would be easier if there would not be the challenge of longevity. Longevity. It's kind of interesting, we are kind of, in the moment, in the first time not in the first time, again in color, at least in color photography, the first time that in the recent years, longevity of prints increased, or let's say the projection of longevity, because no one had for 100 years in dark storage an inkjet print and looked at it. But you know, there are testing methods, for example, for William Research, to do accelerated testing and anticipate how long things may last. But before, it was kind of the opposite. The normally Kodak photo papers, they faded in no time. So there were these infamous wedding photos of the 50s or 60s, which I think they were already gone in the 70s. I think Ektachrome slides of the 70s, and I have to take a close look at mine, are heavily in decline. Kodachrome didn't have that problem because it's actually inherently a black and white process. So Kodachrome slides last a little bit longer. But on the printing side, yeah, quite a bit longer, I think. On the printing side, in the 90s, there were introduced some papers like Fuji Crystal Archive paper, which got ratings at about 60 years. But later, they were reduced, downgraded, I think, to 40 years. And there may be even issues with chemistry residues, which may cause shorter lasting prints. So the strongest influence in the moment on fine art printing is longevity. That's kind of an overriding criteria for making printers and especially inks. And you know, honestly, when my parents died, they had for 25 years a Ciba chrome print at the wall, and it was pretty good. And that's what we want. We want that pictures last, because we don't know how much it means to a person to have that print. And fading prints are not fun. When in, I think when was it? I think in the middle 70s, they changed the black and white world to RC papers. They faded sometimes in 2 months. You got some bad artifacts, and then the old black and white Barrett papers came back. Of course, resolution is an issue we want to have. We don't want to see the dots. We want to see a photo. We want to see it as one image. This plays mainly actually a role when we have very smooth areas in the image, when we have smooth gradations. There we don't want to see just a dot pattern. And especially a challenge is black and white. Black and white is because, you know, you don't get sidetracked by color. You see all the flaws if your printer cannot deliver on it. But on the other side, it's also, you know, when you are exhibiting some photos, and you immediately know who's a photographer and who's not. There are some people who look at the pictures, and then there are some people who have a loop. So in some ways, it doesn't matter for looking at a real picture. A picture has a viewing distance. But then that said, I'm not really sure to determine that sometimes you see something on the picture although you don't see the dots. It just looks different. When it's kind of very smooth, it may more appeal to you than it doesn't look like it, although you don't see the dots. But it may be related by a bad dot pattern, by not enough resolution, be it from the printer, be it from the photograph you took yourself. The good news is all the main printers today have at least very reasonable resolution. So they don't have really, they don't suffer from not having enough resolution. Yeah, inks is kind of the core to everything, not because it's called Inkjet, but you know, it sounds so easy. You have a couple of inks, mix them, and you're done. But you know, these inks have, again, to last. They have to mix up well to new colors. So which kind of inks you have is very important. In the meantime, I think it's easily a $1 billion market. So it's really a main profit for many, many companies. I think 10 years ago, the big chemistry companies, they just laughed about inkjet. Now it's a big income for them. So, which means they research ongoing on new ink formulas, on new encapsulation of inks, on new dilutions for inks, on new pigments and such. There are two main types of inks. One is dye and one is pigment inks. I get to that in a minute. Everyone who does inkjet printing knows that inks are very expensive. And, you know, that's why the companies love you. I think they could easily give you the printer for free. and be happy. And that's why they also prevent third-party inks in it. They do all the tricks in the books to prevent that. On the other side, I hardly ever use third-party inks because I would need to do the research whether it's good, it lasts, or so. It's very difficult whether it's consistent, whether I even get it tomorrow. So, yeah. But on the other side, you pay a lot of money. The main inkjet printers are now getting from 8 to 12. They started kind of 6 inks and counting. And quite a bit has to do with Gamut, and the other thing has to do with black and white. That's why we get more inks. But don't just think that if you have more inks, it has to be better. You have also new problems, because you have to handle 12 inks. You have to mix 12 inks for the optimum quality. So it doesn't really make the life easier for the software. But more gray inks in a system, I love it. So the main systems I use, I have about 3 or 4 black inks. And that's very important if you do black and white. Some would argue you need at least 6 to 7, just black inks. And the other areas where they add now red, green, blue to get more to some of the more difficult colors. Actually, it doesn't always mean you get those colors. And there are 12 ink printers which shine in one area of the gamut. And there are 8 color printers which shine in a different area of the gamut. So it's not trivial here. Dye inks. Dye inks have much smaller particles, so they are much easier to handle from any printhead. They can be more easily produced to produce a higher gamut. But, and this is a big but, they fade in open air. So from some dye printers, I actually could print on a matte paper, put it out, 3 days, I would have a close to white sheet, would be reusable. Not quite so, but it's really, you couldn't see any image anymore in pure sunlight. And this is because the particles are that small. So that's exactly the opposite, because they have a big surface compared to their volume. And all the things like ozone, UV, everything works on them, oxidation and such. There's one cure for it in some cases, which is called swellable media, where actually the media sucks in the dye ink and encapsulates it and makes it longer lasting. But this has a disadvantage that only very few kind of glossy RC papers can be used. HP made nice printers doing that, which produced beautiful quality, but you were limited to a certain type of papers. Which means today, none of the major manufacturers actually offers dye-based printers for the fine art market. They don't claim it's a fine art, it's something for longevity. So they have all now agreed to compete on pigment inks. And that's good, because they can challenge each other, which hopefully gets us even better prints in the future. So pigmented inks on the other side have much larger particles. This results in much longer longevity. The challenge is to make pigmented inks which have a wider gamut. That's more challenging than doing it with dye inks. And this is a big and, they cause clogging because the particles are bigger and they are very hard to keep in solution because they sink to the bottom, and that's why if you enter a new cartridge, you shake it a little bit. So it's tricky, and they also like heads. They like to clog it up. And a clogged head results in banding or one color not present or whatever. So that's a problem. As said, this is now the main ink for fine art printers. But probably in 10 years it will change. Some say solvent inks may be the next wave. I don't know. We have to say that Epson was the first company who made a big investment and a big work on printing with pigmented inks, and the competition didn't really care. Which resulted that Epson owned this market. I say owned because last year Canon and HP made at least inroads into this market. But you know, Epson has a long experience in working with it. They are now, I think, in the 3rd or 4th generation of pigmented inks. But you know, the other companies did their research too. So we have now at least the 3 major players in that market. And I'm talking about the market of not the highest end. You know, there are the Roland printers and such, which may be the better printers, but they are kind of not mainstream high-end, let's say. I consider the Epson, the HP high-end, but they are not, maybe not as sophisticated as the Rolands. And as I understand, they even use Epson or actually Seiko heads. So the heads are the same as, for example, from Epson printers. The main issue with pigmented inks, and that's all about what's currently was going on with the printers, is that all the manufacturers have to face the issues with these pigmented inks. One is metamerism. Metamerism is that you look at 2 different lights, and especially neutrals can switch from green to magenta, or it doesn't look neutral. It looks different on different light. Another thing which is kind of problematic, because on pigment is interesting, the ink sits actually on top of the paper. And because it sits on top of the paper, you see the difference between the gloss of the ink and the gloss of the paper, called gloss differential. And that can be more or less distracting, mostly in an angle. So it's kind of interesting. If you put it behind glass, it doesn't really matter. But you know, you look at the print this way, it matters.
Is there a reason that metamerism is more of an issue with pigments than with dyes?
The question was, is there a reason that it's more an issue with metamerism is more an issue with pigment than with dye? Honestly, I don't know. I just know it is a big issue with, or was at least. Metamerism is not as big issue anymore. But the first generation, the P2000 from Epson, metamerism was quite a bit an issue. But it had also to do with not having enough gray inks in there. It was just one black. Bronzing. Bronzing is, again, you know, if you print and there's a white spot in it, you don't print. There's no ink put on. And if you look at an angle, you see kind of interesting effects, which is called bronzing, which looks bad. You know, you move it around the print. Again, behind glass, it doesn't matter. And you need to have kind of different blacks for matte paper and photo paper. The reason is for a glossy kind of paper. The reason is a glossy paper for inkjet has to have what is called microporous. It has to be a rough surface, which is kind of a contradiction, glossy and rough, which means it has to be so fine, rough, microporous that the ink can sit on it. If you have now matte black, which has coarser structures, it would kind of sit and not really fit. It would kind of be really on top. So you have 2 different inks for matte papers and for photo papers. And in the Epson, you have to switch, and that's kind of in some printers, it's really a major hassle and major investment. On the 3800, it is still, you should think about twice when you switch, because some dollars are gone. But on a 4800, close to $80 to $100 are gone, plus a lot of work. But you know, they fix it soon.
So So once you switch, you cannot put the old cartridge back?
Yes, but you have to have a switch mode. It cleans off the lines. So it's just this. What I'm talking was ink waste. Yeah. So because they need actually a ninth head in there. In the head, there's a ninth color should be in there. In the 3800, they have it kind of in the head switching in very short lines. So they get away with a couple of dollars loss.
Why is matte versus glossy only an issue for black? Why isn't it an issue for the other colors?
Because it is related to the Dmax, to the maximum black. You don't get a good maximum black out of a photo black, which is finer coarse, yeah? And it's just about the Dmax. Printers. There are actually two major differences in heads. One are thermal heads, where the ink gets heated and then spit out, and the piezo head, which is kind of an electric mechanism to spit out inks. I know HP and Canon have different thermal heads, but what is the difference exactly? I don't really care. But Epson has the piezo heads, and these are in the end very major differences, with all their advantages and not advantages. But that's a problem of the manufacturers, and then sometimes it may be a problem of stability of printers. The piezo heads have a good record of being very stable. Unfortunately, they have also a very good record in clogging. But I think at least in the old days, the piezo head were always the more precise. Whether it's still true, I don't really think so very much, because in the prints you get from the HPs and the Canons, you see they are also very good. So you have consumer printers, which are just letter-size printers, A3, and large format printers. Here on top, this is a typical representative of a desktop printer in A3, and this is my 44-inch printer, which is a monstrous thing. You have to calibrate your printer, which sets the ink limits. So what is the maximum of ink you can put of a certain kind you can put on a certain paper? You have to linearize so that the printer knows how to produce fine gradation so that it linearizes on the colors. And there's a big difference between the Epsons and the others. The Epson actually are kind of factory calibrated and are known to have a good stability over a long time. The others are user calibrated, which means they may have not that much stability over a long time. But on the other side, you can create the stability at any time and point you want, at every point in time you want. So both have advantages, yeah? And you need to profile these printers. We get to that in more detail. You cannot believe how much problem single sheet feeding can be. The only printer I have currently which is really pleasant to use on single sheet feeding, maybe the HP 9180. It's very easy. It's flat feeding. The Epson on the large format are also easy to feed. But single sheet feeding is one kind of problem. The rolls are, in most cases, working fine. But rolls have other disadvantages. We get to that later. As I said, nozzle clogging. You know, all these printers have some sort of clogging. But these days, the Canon and the HP, they have kind of auto-check. So they actually can find out that it's clogged, even during printing. So they can do a second pass if they realize some nozzles clog. And that seemed to work. Of course, nozzle checks cost ink, cost time, and they can be sometimes a surprise. You know, you just see, oh, that looks strange, you know. The worst scenario is when it looks strange and you experiment. So you think the source is something completely different, but then you realize one color is not really working at 100%. And one of the effects is banding. Banding is, of course, little stripes looks ugly. And, you have microbanding, which is hardly visible. And then there's banding, which is into your face. But, overall, they work very well in that domain today. But a couple of years it was not always that fun. And you have to do adjustments, head alignments, and all that. Today, the head alignment of all these tools, all these printers, is done most of the time automatically. You can do manual alignment in many cases, but the automatic, actually, in my book, does the trick.
So for these kinds of automatic clog detection, do they have a little light detector looking at the paper?
I don't know what they do, but in principle, for example, an HP head is a chip. They produce it completely in a fab. That's the advantage. For example, HP can produce new types of heads in no time because it's all chip design. It's nothing manual done anymore to that head. It is, but don't ask me how they do the detection. But they can have logic directly at the head, very close. But I never counted.
How can I find an inkjet printer which doesn't clog?
Eh?
Where can I find an inkjet printer?
No, actually, the HP, I haven't seen clogging. So I have seen it slow down because it probably has clogging, but it corrected it. Yeah.
On the high end, they have some that you just don't ever power down, and
Yeah, that's what they do. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Also on the 9180, you never power it down. So on the Epson, I would power it down depending which printer you have, because otherwise it may clean too much to your taste.
And also on the HP, when you replace the head, you're replacing the print head as well. So
No, that's not true. That's not true for the pigment printers. They have separate heads from the ink. That's old.
okay.
That's history. But they have replaceable, user replaceable heads. And for example, the HP have one head for 2 inks, cost about $60, $70, so it's reasonable. On a Canon 12-ink IPF 5000, they have 2 heads with 6 inks each, and I think one costs $600. And the Epson heads are also not cheap, and you cannot actually, it's not user replaceable, or it's at least not thought to be. Okay, inks is key. But the other, even more, not even more, but as important part is the paper. And that's actually the key combination: printer, ink, paper. We have today so many papers, you can probably, I don't know, it's endless. The main papers are matte papers, fine art papers. With matte papers, I mean more these simple papers, which are not for gallery or use or something like that. You have satin and glossy papers. And of course, then there are all shades on the planet in between. But the main is actually it is matte surface or a glossy surface. I have a strange relation to RC papers. If you would just look at the print, at what you see, it's beautiful what they produce. Wonderful prints. Beautiful. But then you see the plastic paper, and from the aesthetical side, you think, oh, it's so plastic. Behind glass, you don't see anything of that. Yeah? So it's kind of more like, we are used. It's kind of, it's a tactile feeling with it. On the other side, I can get to you in a moment. On the other side, a matte fine art cotton paper looks beautiful without print. Just look at the paper. It's so beautiful, smooth surface. Yeah? But does it really matter for the photo? I don't know. You don't get the gamut like on the RC paper. Yeah? Your question?
But don't the plastic papers fade much quicker? At least my experience with Epson. Epson has a very nice plastic one that's...
Which printer did you use? Which printer did you use?
1280, which is a
Yeah. You use dye inks, dye-based inks. On pigment, it's not the case. There are some issues which I will cover, but this is dye ink. Yes.
It's very fast.
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with the plastic paper. It has to do with the dye ink.
But on a Epson matte paper, it does not fade in 5 years, 6 years. That's the time I have.
Yeah, because it probably sinks into the paper. So you have either wood pulp or cotton rag, expensive and beautiful. And matte papers have lower DMAX. Sorry, you had it. Resin coated. So it's paper coated, you know, I call it plastic. Okay, resin coated paper. And then, believe me or not, there are many other media. You can print on aluminum. You print on textile. Actually, textile is a big market. So there are companies who are specialized to make raster imaging processes for print on textiles. Or would you ever think that someone prints on snowboards? Maybe not, but they do, and they care, believe it or not, that they have 5 machines which are completely in sync in color management. I don't know why they bother about that, but you know, they do. They want one snowboard to be exactly as the same. They are probably more picky than photographers.
You don't know why surfboard, skateboard, and snowboard companies do that. Don't live in Santa Cruz. They're very picky companies.
Yeah, of course. You know, that's hype. You know, but yeah, I know. Although they want to surf with it, you know, would whiteboards is, but you know, it's not. I know it's lifestyle.
People collect them.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's come on. Exactly. That's what you do. Leicas are not for photography. You know, they collect it. Oh, that's a good reminder that they shut mine down. Thank you for reminding me. The important part is that paper itself doesn't really work well with inkjet printings. It needs to be coated. It has to have a coating on the surface. Otherwise, you get exactly that, what we see here, that it spreads into the paper. It's not precise. You don't get a good image. So you want that it is either sitting on top or somewhere it sinks into it, but not spreading into the paper. So you need to have a coating. And that's interesting. Sometimes you have a paper manufacturer who doesn't have the patents for the coatings and vice versa. So it's a lot of mixtures. But both have to be good. And both have to last. And you know, I don't know enough about the coatings where they may be the weak point in something, in how long prints last. Issue with papers, we have optical brightness. You mentioned that. That's, of course, you know, we wanted whiter white, which means actually we have papers which be in the blue have 110% brightness, which is interesting. So you get more light back than you put in because it reflects the UV light as visible light. But in the end, I think it looks so aggressively white that it actually doesn't look good. So that's my take. And the brightness fade in a different rate than the rest of the image. So it would then yellow, so-called yellow. And the most dangerous thing is to put a paper with brightener aside of a natural paper. Then everyone says, oh, this is yellow. No, the other one is blue. But our eyes tell it's yellow. And because you compare, you don't like the yellow. If you see it by itself, you say, wonderful print, beautiful, natural, all that. Put a white sheet of paper beside it and say, why are you printing on such a yellow paper? Pigmented prints on glossy media, they have all the effects I told with gloss difference and such. And they have sometimes what is called down there outgassing. It's actually because there's still moisture coming out. And if you would frame them too early, it could even fog your frame. I have never seen it, but it's there. And then on the nice cotton papers, these wonderful fine cotton dust, which has nice side effects. First of all, you print on the dust goes away, then you have a white spot, not nice. The second is it has dust and it clogs your head, yeah? So it's very often if you use one of these smaller consumer printers, put in beautiful cotton paper, you have more clogging problems. Or one thing I learned recently, some printers have the cutter very close to the heads. It's a great idea to cut cotton paper in the printer near the heads because all the dust will assemble at the heads and you will have all sorts of problems. So try to avoid that. I, for myself, print nearly exclusively on sheet paper. First, for other reasons too, we'll get there. One thing I'm currently fighting a little bit is that some paper manufacturers don't have the quality control they should have. For example, some dark gray spots in the middle of the paper, 3 sheets in a row or something like that. That's not fun. And you pay $4 to $5 per sheet. Yeah? So I hope, but will be sorted out. Brief going through color management. It's not time for color management. You had talks about color management, but printing without color management, actually works. It will take you a lot of paper and a lot of ink. So, and not talking about time. You can use for soft proofing your printer and try and dial in some new colors and say, oh, a little bit more red and such. You can do that. Not a good idea. So the key to color management is the knowledge that an RGB value does not define a color. That's for some shocking. It just tells a percentage of what red, green, and blue is used on one device. So if you have a percentage of red, green, and blue on one device, it will create a certain color. Let's assume it would be stable. So color management is complex, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do the best you can do. And believe me, you don't need to know all the ins and outs of color management to be successful with printing. So what you actually have, you need to have a color space which defines a device. In that context, the RGB value has a very well meaning of a really well-defined color. And that's the trick. You define an RGB value in a color space which is kind of an abstract device. Think of an abstract device. This is an absolute color. And now you get to the following situation. You have an image which has a color space where, so every RGB value has inside with the color space an absolute meaning. And now you translate the color to the other devices, which means the RGB values will be changed because the devices may need a different way to describe the same color if they can. Yeah? So the same is important for the monitor, for the printer. Leave out the camera because that's the other way around and not for today. Color gamut is very often described in a 2-dimensional way, but actually it's a 3-dimensional thing. We don't want to bother that much, but it's interesting how different color spaces are. This is sRGB, this is Adobe RGB, this is ProPhoto RGB, which is a monstrous space. And these in the middle are profiles for concrete printers. This is for papers, a matte paper, and the other one out there is for more glossy paper. Just get an idea how these things look like. But as I said, color management is soft proofing. Why do we do soft proofing? Because we want to spend as little time doing multiple prints. Because that's a waste of ink, paper, time, money. But then I hear, someone said, I have now the perfect match from screen to print. I have problem with that because, a matte paper you cannot see on a glossy screen. However would you do that? How would a glossy screen look like a matte paper? It's not possible. So what you can get a close impression to reduce the amount of proofs you need to print. But the real proof is always a print. I'm sometimes not that picky, so what I do is I see on the monitor a picture which makes me confident that what I print looks good. Because I'm the judge that I like it, so there's no one else to decide. No one will tell me when I show in a print, oh, this doesn't match your screen. Because I don't deliver my screens with my prints. That's not the case. I mentioned it very early on. Printer profiles are the most important part. And you don't believe what it can go wrong with it. It can show less detail because it has a tone curve. The colors are off. The mapping of out of gamut of two saturated colors may be bad, and so you cannot distinguish colors. And one thing is important. One profile is for a single combination of printer, paper, ink, print calibration, driver setting, viewing light. So if you change one of the parameters, you need a different profile. Yeah? So restrict, don't have 50 papers to use, don't have 99 viewing light conditions to be used, yeah? And try to settle down to something which works. But as I said, change one of the parameters, your profile is invalid. Sometimes it may be working good enough for your purpose that you decide. Yeah? But for example, on a profile for a glossy paper doesn't normally work on a matte paper because it would not use photo black, it would use matte black, for example. The main thing to watch for is how behave oversaturated colors in mapping, how neutral are neutrals, because that's where our eye is very sensitive. If you have a black and white print, you see it immediately a color cast. If in normal color photos, you may not see it, but in neutrals, you see it. The rendering intent, just briefly, is how you deal with out-of-gamut colors. It's a white thing. The tone curve is very important, how linear is the print. And unfortunately, the viewing light plays also a role. I try to make it kind of that in average light, it works fine, because I don't want to say, if you buy my print, you need to have this kind of color temperature in your viewing condition. This is for people who are strickling for galleries. They do that. Creating printer profiles, you need a spectrophotometer. This is, we use most of the time, I1 is one of the most popular, or for example, the HP wide format printers have built-in spectrophotometers, actually also an I1. We recently released a test image, and that's kind of interesting. I was not a fan of these images, honestly. Yet now I release one which is actually based mainly on Bill Atkinson's color patches, which are in there. But we found that you can see a lot what this printer does by just printing this image, although you may not care of any element. But you see, for example, if the strawberries look inviting, it's a good chance the print is pretty good. If the aspen bark has fine detail, it's also something which tells you about it. Yeah? We have a whole article on the website which explains what to look there for printing. So you save actually time, because if this print looks bad, don't try others. Yeah? If this is good, it may not be that your print looks bad, but then you can tweak it. But you know the printer is correct.
Are there any other display mechanisms, rather than trying to make print on the screen look exactly like what's going to show up on the paper, to instead highlight on the screen those parts of the print that are out of gamut or that violate tonal range variation, so that, kind of the zebra striping you get in a video?
Yeah, you have out of gamut warning in Photoshop, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's an important part.
But you had some other metrics there in terms of tone variation and whatnot.
I don't think they, that's actually where these things are, so that you can see how far the black is really printed. Once the highlights are printed well with the profile, and once the shadows are printed well, the tonal range is okay. It doesn't mean it's linear, but the profile makes it normally quite linear. So I think if you see, this is more a visual clue, and you have also the gray ramp here. I think you have all the elements you need. Yes. Black and white printing is a whole world by its own, and it's as complicated as color. It doesn't have the out-of-gamut problem, but, black and white lives by tonality. That's the only thing you do, yeah? So it was kind of interesting in the beginning, a couple of years ago, the manufacturer said, you know, who wants to make a printer which does black and white? Nobody really cares. Yeah? Now they have mostly nearly all three blacks because they found out that people care. And you know, it's always, the more you have colors, the more the people like black and white say, get rid of that color, you know? And it is really, both are different art forms and both have their life. And so we are now at a new wave where you can do on the same printer excellent black and color images and get also very good black and white prints in the moment. The interesting thing, and I just published recently again, was actually, I repeated that, how you can soft-proof black and white on your monitor. It's not as trivial as you think. If you use the specialized black and white modes of your printers, that's kind of interesting. They deliver you that, but they have no means to profile it. I want to give you a little bit of time for questions. So printing software, you know, it's kind of interesting. You say, oh, that's the driver for the printer. It's kind of, you know, that plays with my printer. But you're talking about quite a complex piece of software. Because it has, do I have a slide? I think I should. It has to do, what is for this paper the right height? How's the drying time in stopping between? What is the speed? What are the ink limits? How do I get detail in dithering? How do I smoothen out gradients? How do I map 12 colors? Exercise for this afternoon, make 12 color mappings for, write your own driver this afternoon. Just kidding. So it is a really major piece of software. That's why sometimes some printers may work better with a RIP from companies who are dedicated to just writing printing software. And black and white gives a different kind of challenges. Then you have the printing host applications. The most known is Photoshop. We have currently the discussion of 16 to 18 bit, so that you have also a 16-bit pipeline to the printer, whether it's matter or not. But likely it will matter soon, because you can do more, with more information, you can do smoother gradients and such on the print. Some help by getting Photoshop plugins so that you directly print from a plugin, because the printing process is, from these applications, sometimes very error-prone. You have to select the printer, the paper size, the application print dialog, the printer driver dialog, and they all, again, have to match. And these are sometimes 3 or 4 dialogues you have to go through. And if you decide one wrong, gone is the paper, $5, 15 minutes, and ink. Yeah, so application like Lightroom do it a little bit better, yeah? And this is easier from a RIP, from a raster imaging processor. Post-processing, drying is very important. If you have from roll, you have to decurl. There are devices where you can decurl paper, and so on. I skip RIPs a little bit. They are kind of dedicated applications which do nothing else than printing. In the productive environment, you have to have a RIP because otherwise you don't get the productivity. Multiple photos on one sheet and all different color manage and such. But also sometimes you get the optimal quality through RIPs. All is based to have good photo editing, because the old darkroom is now the Lightroom. I wrote it this way, not to confuse with the product, but you know the product has its name from it. So what you do in Photoshop is actually, or in Light Zone, is actually preparing the print what you did in the classic darkroom. And that's where most of the your time is. Once you have figured out how the printer gets it, that's done. Nearly on time. Question and answers, please.
What's your tips to get neutral black and white?
What?
What's your ideas and tips and hints to get neutral black and white when printing?
You mean neutral? I think the main printers which have about 3 gray inks And if you use their black and white mode, they get a very good neutral. I even get it in color mode from some printers today. I think they get you get pretty good neutrals today. It's not too difficult anymore. The interesting part is that I don't actually want neutral prints. I mostly tone prints, yeah, split toning, shadows and highlights different toned, yeah, which also helps you around this problem, because neutral to one looks too cold, to the other too warm. So it's never in the classic darkroom that you really want a neutral print, but you didn't want metamerism. You don't want to look at greenish. That's for sure you didn't want to have.
Time for one more.
Yeah, one more.
That's kind of an off question. So how will Inkjet in the future compare with like lightjet printers moving forward? Who's going to win out?
The inkjet printers already win against lightjet. Lightjets are very good. Get me right, yeah. But the problem with lightjet, first of all, you cannot put into your room a lightjet, which think of that iteration, yeah. So you would need to softproof on an inkjet printer anyway to get to the lightjet, yeah. And I know very good fine art photographers at Ansel Adams Gallery. They print, of course, from most of the prints on inkjets, and sometimes they go on lightjet if they cannot handle the sizes, because if you handling 40 by 50 print is an art by itself. Yeah, I wouldn't know how to do that. So
So I think we should wrap up now. Thank you very much.
thank you very much.